No,
case of
no
these
problem.
guys being professionals, they're IT professionals and they're professionals in different areas. Just because they're IT doesn't mean that they're security professionals or networking professionals. Is that a safe kind of thing to say?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think most people that work in companies in the IT function are strong generalists is what I would say. Is they have various affinities, but they oftentimes are faced with managing a multi-dimensional IT environment. They need to work on workstations, servers, network security, projects, etc. So they may not be as deep in any one area. And the most sort of abandoned area for expertise is network security. Reason being that it typically doesn't make financial sense to hire someone with those skills until you get to a fairly substantial sized company.
Mm.
And until that point, you're living with the risk that we just talked about.
So it's an interesting position to be in to one, not know what you don't know, right? Not know where your blind spots are. Um, but two, to have all of these vendors out here that are trying to sell you solutions and you just can't make sense of it all. And I think that's probably a big problem that a lot of these ITs and CISOs find themselves in, where are these IT directors, where it's just, okay, what do? We know there's a problem, right? We know our security posture isn't where it should be, but how do we fix it? And oh, we've got a million other things to do while I'm trying to fix it. Right. So what would you say to
Yeah.
those guys?
So I think the big is that there's this expression that really matters to me, which is don't implement anything you can't manage. Right? So if you, again, I'll go to the lowest common denominator. If you implement a workstation patching solution, you wouldn't do that without knowing that you need to address any issues that come up with that, right? So if you implement this workstation patching solution and you automate as much of it as you can and something goes wrong, you need to fix that. You need to work on the person's workstation. You need to have the skills to do that. You need the visibility into whether the patching actually worked, right? So that's something that's pretty common. IT people are pretty on top of that. So I think one of the challenges is, like I said, so since there aren't network security skills on staff and available, companies depend on a project. So they have someone come in or they have a company come in and they implement security technology, and then that company with those skills walks away. And now you're faced with a skills gap as well as an understanding gap. So my view of that is the best way to look at it is, if you're going to implement security technology, how are you going to make sure that you both maintain it and look at the output? And if you can't do those two things, you're not really implementing security technology. You're really just installing a point in time security patch.
And this is probably what they talk about when they say, cybersecurity has an effectiveness problem. And this is the root of it, right?
This
That
is the root of it.
people
Mhm.
are buying solutions, they're just implementing them, they're not understanding exactly
Mhm.
how to deploy them, and then they're just trying to kinda stay afloat is what's going on.
Yeah, and I mean, I have a really good example. We had a recent conversation with an IT leader, and they were taking over a new environment. And what they had taken over had all kinds of great software. They had their predecessor had selected a very powerful workstation endpoint management product. So they call that EDR, endpoint detection and response, a very advanced piece of software. They had invested in a perimeter security software. They had invested in reasonable firewalls, and yet no one looked at any of it. None of it. So they had purchased all this software without any plan or approach to how they were going to unify this into a security solution. So what I think is really important, truly, whether it be us, someone else, or internally, is that you think about the security that you implement as an ongoing responsibility. So that's why I keep emphasizing maintenance and visibility. That's the key, because otherwise, just like you said, all of these solutions are out there. They're dizzying in their capabilities, but none of them that I know of anyway are set them and forget them. There's no such thing. So there's a tail on the dog, right? You gotta you there's a long-term maintenance issue that you got to deal with. So that's, I think, where our biggest value is that we see ourselves as working with our customers on figuring out how to maintain and operationalize solutions that are put in place.
That's interesting. So if I was the head of IT, if I was an IT director, and I wanted to really be honest and really critical, the first question I would ask is who is responsible for our security, all right? And then probably the second would be what is the process and procedure for that,
Yeah, and
right?
how do you prove it to me? How
And
do
how
you
do you
prove
prove it?
that we're secure? Prove it to me.
Mhm.
So if I was a C-level executive in a company and I was new to a company, they don't have to even be in IT. I'd care about, CEO, CFO, COO. I'd care about the security of my environment because this is a great risk to my business. And I would want someone to demonstrate to me that security is in place, visible, and that when something happens, there's an actual plan to how we would address an attack, a breach, a maintenance item so that we don't get breached.
Right.
So that's the whole thing, and I think that's one of the things that we often have as our first conversation with customers is, are you vulnerability scanning your devices on a regular basis? Are you looking at the reporting output of your security devices?
Right. And these out of the box solutions just they don't work unless there's someone there to make sure they're working, right? There's unless there's someone there to
Well, and
make
they
sure that
have
they're
to
being
be
maintained.
yeah, they have to be
Yep.
tuned to the business. So a good example of that is there's a capability in almost all firewalls these days called geo protection,
Mhm.
geographical protection, right? You have to understand what the business does and how they require communication to work. But if you only work in the United States, all of your customers, all of your interactions are US based, you can limit the access to your environment by blocking whole geographic areas of the world. And that requires knowledge of the business, right? And almost all of the software that's on these devices requires some measure of understanding the business and best practice tuning, and
Right.
it changes.